The sight no one could ignore, the winter air, was sharp. Cutting against the skin like tiny blades, the city street was busy, filled with the noise of footsteps. Voices and engines. People hurried past, heads down, coats wrapped tight. No one looked left or right. They didn't want to see anything that might slow them down. They didn't want to notice pain or hunger, but Daniel saw it. He saw her. In the shadow of a crumbling brick wall, next to a rusty metal fence, a young alien woman knelt. Her knees touched the wet ground. Her clothes were torn, thin and dirty, offering little warmth. Her hair, once beautiful, was tangled and dull. Her hands trembled as she reached toward a small metal bowl on the ground. It wasn't hers. It was the dog's, a thin brown dog, chained to the fence. Growled low, but didn't stop her. She picked up a handful of the cold, soggy food and shoved it into her mouth. She chewed fast, like she feared someone would take it away. People passed her without a word. Some glanced in disgust, others pretended not to see. One man muttered, "Filthy alien," under his breath. Another woman whispered to her friend. They're all like that. But Daniel didn't walk away. Something in him refused to ignore her. He didn't see a filthy alien. He saw someone starving, someone alone. Someone who had given up hope. He stepped closer, his boots crunching. On the thin layer of ice on the ground, the alien woman froze. Her body tense like a cornered animal. Her large, luminous eyes looked up at him. Fear and mistrust written in every line of her face. She looked ready to run, even though she had nowhere to go. Daniel raised his hands slowly, palms open. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. His voice was low, gentle, the kind of voice you'd use for a scared child or a stray animal. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked from him to the dog's bowl and then back at him. Daniel's chest tightened. It was freezing, and she had nothing. He could see her breath in the air, see her shiver. See the way she kept one arm close to her body as if nursing an injury. "You don't have to eat that," Daniel said, taking a careful step forward. "I can get you something better." Her eyes narrowed. For a long moment, she didn't move. She swallowed hard, then shook her head. Daniel realized she didn't trust him. Why would she? No one else had helped her. People only stared, judged, and walked away. Daniel glanced around. A few people had stopped to watch, whispering to each other. He ignored them. His focus was only on her. "Please," he said, "just come with me. I'll get you a hot meal, and you can rest." Now, the words seemed to hang in the cold air between them. The alien woman hesitated, then lowered her gaze. She took a slow, unsteady breath and pushed herself up from the ground. Her legs wobbled, and she nearly fell. Daniel stepped forward, catching her arm. She flinched at his touch, but didn't pull away. Up close, Daniel could see the thinness of her frame. The way her skin clung to her bones. He could see faint scars along her wrist. Disappearing under her sleeve, she had been through more than just hunger. She had been surviving for a long time and barely. He wanted to ask her name, but now wasn't the time. The cold wind bit at them, and Daniel knew they needed to get moving. "Come on," he said, guiding her gently toward the corner. She followed, slow and careful. Her bare feet made no sound on the icy pavement every few steps. She glanced over her shoulder as if expecting someone to chase her. Daniel noticed the way she kept her head down when people looked at her. It was like she had learned to make herself invisible. They passed a bakery, and the smell of fresh bread made her stop. Her eyes lingered on the window display. Golden loaves, steaming rolls, sweet pastries. Daniel's heart twisted. He made a silent promise to himself right there. She wouldn't go hungry again, not if he could help it. A few minutes later, they reached a small cafe. It wasn't much, but it was warm. Daniel pushed the door open and held it for her. She stepped inside. Blinking at the sudden change in temperature, the heat from the fireplace in the corner wrapped around them. For The first time since he had seen her. Daniel noticed the faintest flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't trust yet, but it was the smallest spark of hope. And that, Daniel thought, was enough for now. Asterisk the offer of warmth at the cafe was small, but smelled like comfort. Fresh bread, warm soup, and roasted coffee filled the air. A few customers sat at tables, talking quietly. When Daniel entered with the alien woman, the conversation slowed. Heads turned, eyes followed them. Some people whispered to each other. Others stared openly, their expressions a mix of confusion and dislike. Daniel ignored them. He kept his focus on her. She stood just inside the doorway, hesitant. Her bare feet shifted against the wooden floor. The sudden warmth made her cheeks flush. But her eyes stayed cautious. She looked around like she was trying to find the fastest way out. "It's all right," Daniel said softly. "You're safe here." She didn't answer. But she took one small step further inside. Her eyes flicked toward the counter, where a young waitress froze mid-smile. The girl behind the counter clearly wasn't used to seeing someone like Leora, though Daniel still didn't know her name. The waitress hesitated, then glanced at Daniel. He gave her a quick nod. A silent request not to make trouble. Daniel guided the alien woman to a table in the far corner. It was away from most of the customers. Where she could sit with her back to the wall, she moved slowly, almost like she expected someone to stop her at any moment. When she sat, she kept her head down, her hands resting in her lap. Daniel noticed how thin her fingers were, almost skeletal, and how her nails were chipped and broken. He took a seat across from her. For a moment, they sat in silence. Her breathing was slow but shallow. She seemed ready to bolt if anything felt wrong. Daniel didn't rush her. Instead, he took off his coat and draped it over the back of her. "Chair here," he said gently. "You can wear it if you're cold." Her eyes flicked up to his. Surprised, then quickly dropped again. She didn't touch the coat, but she didn't push it away either. The waitress came over, holding a notepad. Her smile was polite, but her eyes kept glancing at the alien woman. Daniel ordered 2 bowls of vegetable soup, a loaf of fresh bread, and tea. He could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken questions from the people around them. He ignored them. This moment wasn't about them. When the food arrived, steam curled up from the bowls. The smell alone made the alien woman lift her head slightly, her eyes locked on the soup. Daniel slid one bowl toward her and tore the bread in half. Placing a piece beside it, "It's yours," he said. "Go ahead." Now, for a moment, she didn't move. Her hands stayed in her lap, her eyes darting between him and the food. Daniel realized she was waiting maybe for him to take the first bite, maybe for some kind of signal that it was truly safe. He picked up his spoon, took a mouthful of soup, and gave her a small nod that seemed to be enough. She reached for the spoon, her fingers trembling. The first bite was cautious, but as soon as the warm broth touched her tongue, something changed. She began to eat faster. The heat from the soup spread through her, chasing away the cold that had gripped her bones. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't stop between bites. She tore small pieces of bread and dipped them into the broth. Daniel watched her. Feeling a knot in his chest, it was painful to see how much she had been suffering. But it was also a relief to know she was eating something real, something warm, halfway. Through the meal, she slowed, not because she was full, but because the rush of hunger had eased. She looked up at him for the first time since they entered the cafe. Her lips parted, and she spoke a word in a soft, strange accent. Daniel didn't understand the language, but he understood the meaning. It was thanks, pure, simple thanks. "You're welcome," he replied quietly. For a moment, their eyes held. He saw more than just fear in her gaze now. There was still suspicion, but also the faintest glimmer of trust. It was small, fragile, but it was there when she finished. Daniel ordered another piece of bread for her to take. The waitress placed it on the table, still warm. The alien woman hesitated, then carefully wrapped it in a napkin and held it close, like it was something precious she couldn't afford to lose. The rest of the cafe had mostly gone back to their own conversations, but Daniel knew people would talk. He also knew he didn't care as they got up to leave. He noticed she walked a little straighter than before. Her steps were still small, but they were less uncertain. When the cold air outside hit them again, she pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders, and though she didn't say a word, Daniel could feel it. Something had changed. The offer of warmth had been accepted. And maybe, just maybe, it was the first step towards something bigger. The first hot meal, the small cafe door closed behind them, shutting out the cold wind inside. The heat from the fireplace wrapped around them like a blanket. The alien woman, still clutching Daniel's coat, followed him to the far corner table. She moved with quiet steps, her eyes scanning every corner of the room, as if she expected danger to jump out from the shadows. Daniel noticed how her shoulders tensed each time someone glanced their way. It was like she had been trained to expect trouble wherever she went. He sat down first, giving her space. For a moment, she stood there, unsure if she should even sit. Daniel gave a small nod toward the chair, and slowly she lowered herself into it. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers knotted together tightly. She kept her head down, but he could see her eyes flicking toward the smell coming from the kitchen. It was the smell of bread baking, soup simmering, and roasted vegetables. To Daniel, it was comforting. To her, it was a world she had been shut out from for too long. The waitress brought over the order 2 steaming bowls of vegetable soup, slices of fresh bread, and a pot of tea. The steam curled upward, carrying the scent of herbs and slow-cooked broth. Daniel pushed one bowl toward her. "It's for you," he said gently. Her gaze lifted slightly, then dropped again. As if she couldn't believe it was really hers, he broke a piece of bread, dipped it into his soup, and took a bite. She watched closely, as though making sure it wasn't some trick. When she finally reached for the spoon, her fingers shook. The first sip was small, cautious, but the moment the hot liquid touched her lips, she froze, her eyes widened, and she took another spoonful, then another. It was as if each swallow lit a small fire inside her, pushing away the icy grip of hunger. Daniel could see the color returning to her cheeks. Her breaths slowed. No longer. As desperate as before, she tore the bread into tiny pieces, dipping them into the broth before eating them. It was slow at first, but then her pace quickened. Daniel realized she was eating like someone who had been hungry for far too long. Not just for days, but maybe weeks, and even now. She ate in a way that was careful, like she was afraid someone would take it away halfway through. Her eyes began to shine with moisture. Daniel didn't say anything. He knew those weren't just tears from the heat of the soup. They were tears from the sudden shock of kindness. From the fact that this was the first time in who knows how long she had eaten without fear. A soft sound escaped her lips, a single word in her own language. Daniel didn't understand it. But the tone was gentle. It was thanks. She looked at him briefly, then dropped her gaze again, almost shyly. "You're welcome." He replied quietly. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of spoons against bowls filled the space between them. Daniel let her eat at her own pace. The bread was nearly gone. The soup was almost finished. And for the first time since he had seen her, her posture began to change. She was still guarded, but less curled in on herself. It was as if the warmth of the food was slowly warming something deeper inside her. When the bowls were empty, Daniel poured her a cup of tea. She wrapped her hands around it, holding it close to her face. The steam fogged her eyes for a moment, and she inhaled slowly. Her lips trembled as she took the first sip. Daniel could almost see the tension in her shoulders loosen just a little. Then, without looking up, she spoke in broken words. My name. Leora. It was the first time she had offered him more than a glance or a whisper. Daniel repeated the name softly. Leora. She nodded once, almost like she was giving him a gift. It wasn't much, but it was trust, the very beginning of it. Daniel leaned back, watching her drink the tea. He didn't ask too many questions yet. He could see in her eyes that she wasn't ready to tell her story. Not all of it, not yet. But he knew one thing. This moment mattered. It wasn't just a meal. It was the first step in pulling her back from the edge she had been living on. When they finally stood to leave, Leora hesitated near the door. She looked back toward the table, then toward Daniel, her lips pressed together, and she said one word in English. Thanks. Daniel gave her a small smile. You don't need to. Thank me, he said, but deep inside, he knew the truth. He hadn't just given her food. He had given her a reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could still belong somewhere. Outside, the cold waited for them, but Leora stepped into it with Daniel beside her, and this time, the wind didn't seem quite as sharp because she wasn't facing it alone anymore. Asterisk whispers of her past a walk back from the cafe was quiet. Snowflakes drifted down from the gray sky, landing softly on Leora's tangled hair. Daniel kept his pace slow so she wouldn't feel rushed. She stayed close, but never too close, always leaving a small gap between them. It was like she still wasn't sure if she could truly trust him. The streets were less crowded now, but Daniel could feel eyes on them from time to time. People slowed to look, some whispering under their breath. Leora seemed to shrink whenever she noticed, pulling Daniel's coat tighter around herself. He wanted to tell her not to worry about them, but he knew that was easier said than done. They reached a quiet park, its benches dusted with snow. Daniel stopped there, sensing she was too tired to keep walking without a break. He sat on one of the benches and gestured for her to join him. She hesitated, but then sat, keeping her hands wrapped inside the coat sleeves. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the distant sound of wind through bare tree branches filled the air. Finally, Daniel asked softly, "How long have you been on the street?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze was fixed on the ground. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost a whisper. "Since the camp." Daniel turned slightly toward her. "What camp?" he asked, his tone careful. Leora's lips pressed into a thin line. She seemed to be choosing her words with great effort. "A place where they keep us," she said. "Work. Always work. No food enough." The way she said it sent a chill through Daniel that had nothing to do with the cold. He could see the faint marks on her wrists now that her sleeves had shifted. Thin, pale lines that could only have been left by restraints. Her eyes stayed on the snow at her feet. "They do not like us here," she continued. "If you are alone, you do not last." Daniel clenched his jaw, fighting the anger rising in him. This was more than simple neglect. Someone had treated her like she wasn't even a person. "How did you get out?" he asked gently. Leora's eyes flickered with something, fear, maybe guilt. "I run," she said simply. "They chase. I hide. I keep moving." Her hands tightened in the fabric of the coat as she spoke. She glanced around the park, as if making sure no one was listening. Daniel leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Are they still looking for you?" She gave the smallest nod. "Yes. If they find me, they take me back." For a moment, Daniel said nothing. He just watched her. The way her body seemed ready to spring into flight at any second, he realized she had been living in a constant state of fear, even now, with food in her stomach and warmth on her back. She was bracing herself for the next moment she'd have to run. "You don't have to go back there," Daniel said firmly. "Not as long as I'm here." Her head lifted slightly, her eyes meeting his for a fraction of a second before dropping again. "You help me?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes, I'll help you." It wasn't a promise he made lightly, but once the words left his mouth, he knew he meant every single one of them. They sat in silence for a while after that. The snow kept falling. Settling gently on the bench around them, Daniel could see her shoulders relaxing just a little. Like speaking about it, even in broken sentences, had taken some of the weight off when they finally stood. Leora followed him without hesitation this time. Her steps were still quiet, still careful. But there was less distance between them. It was a small change, but Daniel noticed. Back in the busier streets, she kept close to his side when a group of loud strangers passed by. She shifted slightly so he was between them and her. He didn't say anything about it, but inside, he felt the responsibility settle deeper in his chest. By the time they reached his small apartment building, the light was fading from the sky. The street lamps flickered on, casting a soft orange glow across the snow. Daniel opened the door and held it for her. She stepped inside quickly, glancing over her shoulder before the door shut behind her. It was the first time all day she had been in a space without strangers staring at her. The warmth of the apartment seemed to put her at ease, if only a little. Daniel hung his coat on the rack, but Leora kept his coat wrapped around her. He didn't mind. "Make yourself comfortable," he said gently. She looked around, unsure what that meant. Then she slowly moved toward the small couch, sitting down on the edge like she was afraid she might break it. Daniel went to the kitchen and began making tea. The sound of the kettle filled the small silence. From the corner of his eye, he could see her looking around, her gaze lingering on the small bookshelf, the framed pictures on the wall. It was as if she was trying to understand what kind of place this was, what kind of person he really was. When he brought her the tea, she accepted it with both hands. For a long time, she just held it, letting the heat soak into her fingers. Finally, in a voice so soft, he almost missed it, she said, "I never tell anyone before." Daniel understood she meant the things she told him in the park. He nodded slowly. "You can tell me more when you're ready," he said. No rush. Her eyes studied his face for a moment, searching for something. Whatever she found there seemed to make her shoulders relax just a little more. It wasn't trust yet, not fully, but it was closer than it had been this morning. And for Daniel, that was enough for now. Trouble on the street the next morning. The winter sky was pale and heavy with clouds. Daniel had promised Leora they would get her some proper clothes. She still wore the same torn garments from the day he found her, hidden beneath his oversized coat. They were too thin for the weather, and he didn't want her to spend another day freezing. She followed him quietly through the streets, her steps light, her gaze always moving. Every sound seemed to catch her attention: a car horn, the clink of bottles in a trash bin, the chatter of strangers. Daniel noticed how she walked close to the walls, as if trying to stay out of the open. He didn't rush her, keeping his pace steady and calm. They passed through the market district, where stalls lined the sidewalks. The smell of roasted nuts and fresh bread filled the air, mixed with the sharp scent of fish from a nearby stand. Leora's eyes lingered on the displays, but she didn't stop. Daniel knew she was still adjusting to the idea of being allowed to want things. They were almost to the small clothing shop Daniel had in mind when three men stepped into their path. They were dressed in heavy coats, their breath steaming in the cold, but their eyes were sharp and unfriendly. Daniel felt Leora tense beside him instantly. He moved slightly forward, putting himself between her and them. "Well, what do we have here?" one of the men said, his voice dripping with mockery. "A human walking his pet." The second man chuckled, his gaze sweeping over Leora in a way that made Daniel's fists clench. "She's a bit thin for a pet, don't you think?" The third man tilted his head, pretending to study her. "Maybe she's not a pet," he said. "Maybe she's property that wandered off." Daniel kept his voice calm but firm. "She's with me," he said. "We're just passing through." The first man smirked. "Oh, we know what she is," he said. "But see, people like her. They don't belong out here with the rest of us." Leora's breathing quickened. Daniel could feel the fear radiating from her. She took a small step back, but the men moved forward, blocking the path. "Why don't you hand her over?" The second man said. "Save yourself the trouble." Daniel's patience snapped. "No," he said sharply. "She's not going anywhere with you." The smirk on the first man's face faded into something darker. "You really want to make this difficult?" A few people in the market had started to notice the tension. Some slowed down, watching from a distance, but no one stepped in. Daniel knew if things turned violent, he couldn't outfight all three men, but he also knew he wasn't going to. "Step aside." One of the men took another step forward. Before Daniel could react, a voice called out from somewhere behind the crowd. "Police are on the way." The words cut through the cold air like a bell. The three men froze, then exchanged quick looks. Without another word, they backed away, disappearing into the busy street. Daniel didn't wait for them to change their minds. He turned to Leora. "Come on, let's go." She nodded quickly. Still clutching his coat tightly around her, they walked fast, not slowing until they were several streets away from the market. When they finally stopped in a quieter area, Daniel looked at her. "Are you all right?" She nodded again, but her hands were trembling. "They?" "From the camp," she whispered. Daniel's stomach tightened. She didn't have to say more. He understood. If those men had taken her, she would have been dragged back into the life. She had fought so hard to escape. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Speaking softly, "They won't get you. Not while I'm here." Her eyes met his for a moment. And this time, there was something new there. Not just fear, but a spark of trust. Small, fragile, but real. They reached the clothing shop soon after. Inside, the warmth and soft light made the tension in the air ease just a little. Daniel helped her pick out thick winter clothes, a pair of sturdy boots, and gloves. She moved slowly through the racks, touching the fabric with careful fingers. It was as if she couldn't believe she was allowed to choose. When she stepped out of the changing room wearing her new coat, scarf, and boots, Daniel couldn't help but smile. "You look ready for winter," he said. She gave the faintest smile in return. A rare and precious thing as they left the shop. Daniel noticed she walked a little taller. The encounter at the market had shaken her, but she wasn't hiding as much now. Maybe it was the new clothes. Maybe it was the fact that he had stood up for her. Either way, he knew something had changed. The danger wasn't over. The men from the market could return. The camp might still be looking for her. But Daniel also knew that she wasn't facing it alone anymore, and neither was he. A place to belong. Snow was falling again by the time Daniel and Leora reached his apartment building. The soft flakes clung to her new coat and scarf, melting slowly in the warmth of the fabric. She looked different now, still tired, still cautious, but no longer shivering in rags. Her new boots crunched against the snow as they walked. For the first time since he had met her, Daniel saw a faint trace of color in her cheeks when they stepped inside. The air was warm and carried the faint smell of coffee from a neighbor's apartment. Leora paused in the hallway, glancing around, her eyes flicking toward each door they passed. It was clear she was not used to places like this. Daniel unlocked his own door and held it open for her. She hesitated for just a second, then stepped inside. The apartment was small. One bedroom, a living room, tiny kitchen, but it was clean and quiet. Leora stood near the doorway, her boots leaving wet marks on the floor. Her eyes moved slowly over the room, taking in the bookshelf, the couch, the small table by the window. Daniel noticed how she seemed almost afraid to touch anything, as if she didn't belong here. "You can sit anywhere you like," he said gently. She glanced at him, then at the couch. Slowly, she walked over and sat down on the very edge, her back straight, her hands resting in her lap. Daniel took her coat and scarf, hanging them near the door. The new clothes looked strange without her wearing them, as if they already belonged to her. "I'll make us something warm," Daniel said, moving toward the kitchen. She didn't answer, but her eyes followed him until he disappeared behind the counter. The sound of water boiling soon filled the air. Daniel made tea and set a small pot of soup on the stove. He wasn't sure how much she ate in a day before he found her. But he had decided that as long as she was here, she would never go hungry again. When he brought her the tea, she took it with both hands. She didn't drink right away, just held it close and let the steam rise to her face. Her eyes closed for a moment, and Daniel realized it might be the first time in years she had been. Somewhere warm, with no one shouting at her, they sat in silence for a while. The only sounds the faint hum of the heater and the occasional creak from the old building after a few minutes. Daniel spoke. "You can stay here," he said. Her eyes opened, and she looked at him as if she wasn't sure she heard right. "You mean, here?" she asked slowly, her voice quiet. "Yes," Daniel said, "as long as you want." She stared at him for a long moment, her fingers tightening around the cup. "Why?" she asked at last. Daniel thought for a second, then shrugged slightly. "Because you need somewhere safe," he said, "and because no one should be out there alone." Her lips parted as if to say something, but then she closed them again. It was as though the words she wanted to speak were trapped behind years of silence. She looked down into the tea, her reflection faint. In the pale liquid, finally, she whispered, "Thank you." Daniel gave her a small smile. "You don't have to thank me," he said. She didn't answer. But he could see in her eyes that she meant it. When the soup was ready, he brought 2 bowls to the table. She joined him, eating slowly. It was different from the night before. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't afraid the food would vanish for the first time. She seemed to believe it would be there for her. After dinner, Daniel showed her the small bedroom. It had a narrow bed with clean sheets, a dresser, and a window that looked out onto the street. "It's yours," he said. She stood in the doorway, staring at the bed like it was something from another world. "Mine?" she asked softly. "Yes," Daniel said. "You can sleep here. Close the door if you want, or leave it open." She stepped inside, running her hand over the blanket. It was soft and warm. She pressed her palm into it, as if testing to see if it was real. Then she turned toward him and gave the smallest nod. Daniel knew it was her way of saying she accepted. That night, after she went to bed, Daniel sat on the couch for a long time, listening. The city outside was quiet, except for the occasional sound of wind. From the bedroom, he heard nothing. No movement, no restless pacing. It struck him that maybe this was the first night she would sleep without fear. And that thought alone made everything worth it. The next morning, when he stepped into the kitchen, she was already awake. She sat at the table, holding a cup of tea when she saw him. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. It was small, but it was the first time she had smiled at him without hesitation. Daniel smiled back in that moment. He realized something. It wasn't just that she had found a place to belong. He had to asterisk kindness that echoes weeks past. And the world outside stayed cold. Snow still dusted the rooftops. The air still bit at bare skin. But inside Daniel's apartment, warmth had taken root. Not just from the heater or the hot meals, but from something deeper. Leora had changed. Slowly, quietly, but unmistakably. She no longer flinched every time someone spoke too loudly. She no longer slept with her coat clutched tight like a shield. She began to explore the small apartment, looking through books on the shelf, peeking out the window at night to watch the falling snow. Her steps were softer now, not from fear, but from a calm she hadn't known in years. One morning, Daniel found her in the kitchen. She stood by the stove, holding a pan with both hands. Inside, bread was toasting. the smell filling the air. When she saw him, she gave a small, shy smile. "Breakfast," she said. Her voice still accented, but stronger now. Daniel sat at the table, watching as she set down plates for both of them. It was the first time she had cooked for him, and it felt like a gift. As the days went by, Leora began going outside more. At first, she stayed close to the building. Then she started walking to the park alone, always returning before the sky turned gray. Daniel worried at first, but he could see she was careful, always alert. And she always came back with something, a handful of berries from the market, scraps of fabric she liked, or sometimes nothing at all, except a thoughtful look on her face. One afternoon, Daniel returned home to find her sitting on the floor by the window. A small cardboard box rested in front of her. Inside, 2 kittens curled together. They're tiny. Bodies shivering. They were outside, she said quietly. No mother. Daniel crouched down beside her. The kittens mewed softly, pressing against her hands. "They can stay here," he said. Without thinking twice, her eyes lit up, not with the fear or sadness he had seen before, but with something brighter. From that day, the kittens became part of the apartment. Leora fed them, warmed them, and kept them safe. Daniel realized something. She was beginning to give the same kindness she had once received. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making sure nothing small and helpless had to feel the way she once did. Word began to spread in the neighborhood about the quiet alien woman who cared for strays. At first, people stayed distant, but over time, some of them began to approach her. A child from the next building brought her a small, injured bird. An old woman from across the street gave her a bag of bread crusts for the animals. Not everyone was kind, but more and more. Daniel noticed the looks of suspicion were being replaced with nods of respect. One evening, Daniel walked into the kitchen to find Leora filling a small bag with food. "For the dog," she explained. He didn't need to ask which one. He knew she meant the chained dog from the day they first met. They walked together to that street. The dog wagged its tail when it saw her. She knelt down, placing the food gently into its bowl. Daniel stood behind her, remembering the first time he had seen her there, hungry and desperate. Now, she was the one feeding another. On the way back, snow began to fall again. Leora tilted her head back, letting the flakes land on her cheeks. Her steps were light, almost playful. Daniel watched her and thought about how far she had come. She had been a shadow in the cold, invisible to most. Now she was a part of something, part of a home, part of the lives around her that night. As they sat by the fireplace, the kittens curled up between them. Leora spoke softly. "When you found me, I had nothing," she said. "I thought I would die." Daniel looked at her, but didn't interrupt. She met his gaze, her eyes steady now. "You gave me food, warmth, a place," she continued. "You made me want to live." Daniel's chest tightened. He had never thought of himself as a hero. He had just seen someone in need and acted. But now he understood. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness could change the entire course of a life. "You did the rest," he said gently. "You chose to keep going." She smiled, a real smile. Bright and unguarded. The kind of smile he had never imagined seeing from her when they first met. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the fire crackled, the air warm and safe. The world was still harsh, still dangerous, but within these walls, kindness had taken root, and like the snow that covered the streets, it would keep spreading, from Daniel to Leora, from Leora to others. A chain of quiet acts that would echo far beyond what either of them could see.